Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Katie Steger, NISCA's Director of Capital Projects. Thank you all for joining us for our live 2024 Capital Funding Opportunity webinar. I am joined today by our brand new Capital Projects Program Officer, Lindsay Turley. Welcome, Lindsay. We're so happy to have you here. We are also thrilled to be joined today by hundreds of attendees from all 10 regions across our state, and they're still joining. So thank you, everybody. We are going to start today. I just want to start by expressing our immense appreciation to the governor and the New York State Legislature for their investment of $37 million in capital funding for small, mid-size, and large capital projects for arts and cultural organizations across the state. Capital projects, as you all know, play a transformative role in the longevity of arts and cultural facilities. And in turn, these projects strengthen our communities, promote accessibility and sustainability, and contribute to the growth of our economy. Today's webinar will be an overview of our FY2024 capital projects opportunities. We will review eligibility, the application timeline, all important pre-qualification, and frequently asked questions. Please know we may go over to about 12:15 to accommodate your questions. And many thanks to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We will have a dedicated Q&A session following the presentation, and you can still submit questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. But we really do encourage you to listen to the entire presentation before you begin submitting questions, as many of them may already be covered in today's presentation, incorporated directly into the presentation, or in an FAQ that we've already put together for the end. Please remember that these guidelines are live on the guidelines for the program are live on the NISCA website, and a recording of today's webinar and a PDF of the presentation deck will also be posted to the NISCA website. We will also be hosting virtual office hours with the NISCA Capital team, that's Lindsay and me, starting this Friday at noon, and those will continue more or less weekly through January 2024. So lots of opportunities for you to come and chat with us and ask your questions, hear other people's questions, and find out all of the information that you need for your application. The registration links for office hours are posted on the NISCA website right now under the For Applicants tab. We will also be recording a separate webinar that is specific to how to fill out your budget, both for the long and short form budget forms that you need to upload for your application. So please be on the lookout for those on the NISCA website by the end of this week. Okay, so let's jump into it. The guidelines are and application are now up on the website. You can log in. You can begin your application right now if you're ready. The application portal closes on January 11th, 2024 at 4 p.m. sharp. There are no extensions. There are no exceptions under any circumstances. I can't express this strongly enough. You must have your application in before 4 p.m., before the chimes go off, or we cannot accept it under any circumstances for any reason. So please mark your calendars for an earlier day if you need to. Make sure you get those applications in on time. As I said, we will host virtual office hours beginning this Friday. The web address where you can register for that is on the screen right now. And like I said, everything you need to start the process is available to you right at this moment. So, what is the first step to apply for NISCA funding? Lindsay, can you tell us?
I would be happy to. So before you really think much about your application at all, the most important thing to think about is becoming pre-qualified in the New York State Grants Gateway. You must be pre-qualified as a nonprofit organization to do business with New York State agencies before we can look at your application. We cannot stress how important it is to start this process now. Also, New York State Grants Gateway is a different online portal than Smart Simple, where you will submit your application. We'll go into both of these further. We can go on to the next slide. So if you're a new applicant, you should begin this process literally as soon as you get off this webinar. There are a number of documents you'll need to upload. For returning applicants, your pre-qualification status expires annually. So be sure to log in and check your vault status. Hundreds of vaults are expiring in the next few months. So please review your status today. If your vault is not set to expire before the due date of this application, January 11th, 2024, you do not need to make any changes whatsoever right now. And in fact, we encourage you not to touch your vault whatsoever. If you get a new 990, anything like that, I know you're very eager to upload that document, but really, please don't. If you are good until January 11th, just sit tight, put your application in, and then as soon as the application date is passed, you can update anything you like. If you have any questions about the pre-qualification requirement, you can contact help@arts.ny.gov or also visit the website where there is a pre-recorded webinar just on becoming pre-qualified in Grants Gateway. So what can I apply for? We have two project opportunities, small and mid-sized capital grants and large capital grants. So funding supports improvements, new construction, renovations and expansions of publicly accessible spaces used for arts and culture programming, and purchase and installation of eligible capital equipment systems. We will go into specific eligibility later in this webinar, but the most important thing to remember is it must be capitally eligible, and Katie will go into quite a bit of detail about that. The key differences between the two opportunities is that small and mid-sized grants are awarded in the range of $10,000 to $2 million. We have a no match opportunity within the small and mid-sized grants, and this is specifically available for smaller organizations. And the total project minimum is anywhere from $10,000 for no match grants to $100,000 for match grants. For large grants, the size ranges from $2 million to $10 million. The total project minimum must be $4 million. There are community and economic development requirements, and there's some additional questions, and the Empire State Development review. Again, we'll get into those things more specifically later. And we suggest that you confer with program staff prior to applying. There is less money available for large capital grants this year. And as this is a lengthy application, before you put the effort into it, we want to make sure that your project is fitting the requirements for large capital grants. So the award announcement for both small and mid-size and large is scheduled to be made for April 2024. The grant term for all projects is July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2027. This is a 3-year grant with extensions for up to 2 years considered. You cannot spend any funds before July 1st, 2024, or no NISCA funds. So if your project has already begun or you're anticipating beginning before July 1st of 2024, we ask you to keep that in mind in developing your budget so that NISCA funds are only allotted for expenses that would be incurred after July 1st, 2024. And we also ask that you make that clear in your project timeline. When exactly will NISCA funds start to be applied towards your project? Funding categories include capital equipment, capital construction, or a hybrid of both capital equipment and construction. And the priority for small and mid-sized organizations, we'll be looking at organizations with an average annual operating expenses of under $5 million and will be prioritized in the application review process. Sorry, there's a lot of sirens. I'm just gonna let them pass. Let's hope they don't park right under that window. But all right, so in the small and mid-sized capital category, we do have no match grants. These are flat grants only for applicants with budgets, annual operating budgets below $2 million. They are made in the amounts of $10,000, $25,000, and $50,000. Your project cost, however, must be greater than or equal to the request amount. So if you are asking for $10,000, the project you are proposing for funding in your application must be equal to $10,000. No funds can go back into your operating support. For match grants, you will submit a specific request amount, and the maximum amount of the project cost can be no more than 50% of the total project. And when we say 50%, that's not just NISCA funds, but you have to take into consideration any other state funds that you may already have. So if you've already gotten, say, a Red Sea grant, you have to take that funding into account when coming up with your total project request from NISCA. Any size organization can apply here. For annual operating budgets of $2 million or below, they can also apply, as well as those, you can apply with a budget of $2 million and below. And the amounts here range from $50,000 to $2 million. If your project is $2 million, the max amount that you can ask for is $1 million. For large capital grants, the award amount ranges from $2 million to $10 million, and the minimum total project cost is $4 million. Again, 50% of the total project cost cannot exceed 50% of the total project cost from all state funding sources. And we just want to reiterate again, for those of you considering large capital grants, please reach out to NISCA capital staff first so that we can discuss the alignment of your project prior to applying. And now back to Katie for more on eligibility. Muted, Katie.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Let me just reiterate one thing there, just because there was a lot of confusion about this last year. Your budget, your operating budget, is under $2 million. That means that you are eligible to apply for the no match grants, and nobody else is eligible to apply for the no match grants. But it doesn't mean that's the only thing you're eligible to apply for. If your budget is under $2 million, you can apply in any category that you like. It's just that the no match grants are only available to organizations with operating budgets under $2 million. All right, I just want to make sure that's super clear, because I know some folks, I think, thought they were more restricted last year than they needed to be. So, okay, so that's one piece of eligibility. Let's get back into more general eligibility. First and foremost, Lindsay already discussed this at the beginning, but we can't say it enough. In order to be eligible for any of these opportunities, you must be pre-qualified with the state of New York in the Grants Gateway online portal by the time of the application deadline. There are materials that you need to upload ahead of time, and they need to be approved so that your vault is in what's called pre-qualified status, and that has to happen before January 11th. So get your materials in plenty of time to make sure they have time to get through the system and get approved, okay? You can't do this on the last day. So that's number one. You have to be pre-qualified. Number two, you must be a nonprofit arts and culture organization. That means you have to be a 501c3 organization as designated by the IRS. You can't be an LLC. You can't be an individual. And your primary mission needs to be arts and culture. So there are lots and lots of nonprofit organizations across the state of New York that are primarily health and human service organizations, higher ed organizations, and they do lots of arts programming, but it's not their primary mission. You guys are great. We love the arts programming you do. Unfortunately, not eligible for this program. The one exception to this, there are some organizations that are, let's say, universities or health and human service organizations that have smaller organizations embedded within them that do not have their own 501c3. They operate under the umbrella of the larger organization. These organizations might be eligible, and the umbrella organization might be able to be the applicant on their behalf if they meet certain criteria. And those criteria are essentially, they need to be relatively autonomous, have their own decision-making structures, they need to have their own board, they need to do most of their own fundraising, and they need to be open to the public. They cannot just serve the sort of membership or student body or faculty of the umbrella organization. So if that sounds like you, what we ask is that you please reach out to us. We will send you a form that you can fill out. You send it back and we will review it and let you know if you are approved to apply or not. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, more on eligibility here. So if you are a nonprofit arts and cultural organization and you are pre-qualified, or you're going to be by the deadline, the next thing that you need to have is site control. Site control means that you have the exclusive control of the property that you intend to improve through a capital project. So in order to demonstrate site control that's adequate for this program, you either need to own the property and provide us with the deed, or you need to have a long-term lease. And that lease, how long it needs to be depends on what the project is that you are doing. Every project has what is called an IRS useful life estimate. That's basically how long the IRS says the project is going to be good for. And I will talk more about the specifics of that in a moment. And they attach a timeline to it, a number of years, and they vary. Some elevators are 20 years, lighting systems are 10, roof is 20, stone facade is more like 50 years. So you need a lease that is at least as long as the useful life of the project that you are conducting. This is true for all of the grants of $50,000 and above, and most of the $10,000 and $25,000 grants, with one exception. If you are applying for a $10,000 or a $25,000 no match grant just for the purchase of an equipment system, then you only need a minimum of a 2-year lease. We will allow for that. There are a lot of reasons for that that are above NISCA's purview, why that's allowed. So it's not sort of a decision that we make in-house about the other ones that have to have the IRS useful life. It's non-negotiable, but more on the useful life in a moment. Everybody else, the minimum lease that you could have for a capital project would be 10 years, but it could be much more depending on your project. If you are not sure, you should consult with your general contractor or your architect or whoever else is helping you with this project. And if you're still not sure, you can contact NISCA staff and we will try to help you determine what the useful life estimate is on your capital project. Okay, related to this, if you don't own your facility, if you lease, and you're planning a capital project to the exterior of the facility, a roof, changes to the facade, some kind of hardscaping, you will need to also provide a letter of approval from your landlord saying they are fine with you undertaking these improvements. And you can include that letter as an upload in the same section where you upload your lease. Okay. For all of the programs, NISCA, in addition to prioritizing small and mid-sized organizations, as Lindsay mentioned before, we will also be prioritizing the following projects. Those that are most, appropriately aligned with one or more of the program priorities that we list in the guidelines. We'll put those up on the screen in a little bit. Those projects that are serving communities or regions with lower concentrations of arts and cultural offerings. And then we will prioritize organizations that have not received significant NISCA or NISCA Red Sea capital funding in the last 5 years. Just a note on that, if you have received NISCA capital support before, you are still eligible to apply. It really just means that if there are, multiple organizations with similar scores and one has received significant funding previously and another has not, we would be prioritizing the organization that has not received any capital support in the past. Okay, so we've thrown the words capital eligibility around a lot and capital improvement around a lot. Let's make sure we're all on the same page about what this actually means. Capital projects are funded with bonded dollars. They are capital specific dollars and they have to be used for things that are defined as capital. So what is that? To qualify as a capital improvement, a project must be a permanent alteration or installation to a piece of property that increases the value and or extends the IRS estimated useful life of that property. So things that are cosmetic changes that don't actually increase the value, that don't mean that it will last longer, those do not count as capital. This can include the construction of new facilities, the renovation or restoration of existing buildings, as well as the permanent installation of complete equipment systems that carry an IRS useful life estimate of at least 10 years. So, some people say if it's not attached to the building, if you tip the building over and it falls out, it doesn't count as capital. But that's not the whole story. So let's break down some of this a little more clearly. Capitally eligible equipment systems, something that's really common. We get a lot of requests for these. Let's please make sure that what you're applying for is eligible. In order to qualify as a capital system, not just general equipment, it has to be a complete system. That means it includes all of the elements of the system that it would need in order to function, not just a piece or two. For a lighting system, that means it would have to have all of the instruments, the cables, some way to attach it, and a control element, a light board. If you're missing the light board, the system doesn't work. All of the elements have to be new. You can't just upgrade part of the system because the system is like a chain. It's only as good as the weakest link. So if you have an old light board and new instruments, the useful life estimate on the system is still whatever it was with the old light board. The new elements don't upgrade the entire system. It needs to be permanently installed. That means it can't be something that you can pick up and walk around and move from place to place. I know there's a lot of folks that need equipment like that, but that is not what this program is for. And it needs to be permanently installed by a professional contractor if you are going to use capital dollars to pay for the labor of the installation. So if you have a technical director that you're hoping to have install the lighting system, if they are on your payroll, you cannot use the capital dollars from this grant to pay for that person's salary. They would have to be being paid on a contract, and they would have to be, a qualified professional, licensed if that's necessary for their profession, in order for you to use capital dollars or include it in a capital budget. Just a quick note here, if you're looking for funds for stage rigging, wheelchair lifts, HVAC systems, elevators, or boilers, these things, even though they are equipment technically, are considered construction expenses. So please don't apply in the equipment category with those. Please apply under construction or hybrid if you have other elements that you're including, and you can list them on your budget as construction under the appropriate trade. So let's get to the IRS useful life estimate. I've said these words a lot. This is what the IRS says is the anticipated life of the improvement. It's not how long you think you're going to be able to use it. I know many of you have lighting systems that you've had for 30 years. The IRS doesn't say that that's the useful life of a lighting system. And that's not how long it takes to depreciate. So a lighting system would be 10 years, and that's the absolute minimum that something could be for it to count as capitally eligible. It has to be at least 10 years, but it could be much more. So we talked about what is capital. Sometimes it's also helpful to think about what is not capital. Maintenance and repairs and individual pieces of equipment count as operating costs. They are not capital costs. Those things are separate. They are accounted for separately, and you can't use capital dollars to pay for them. So regular building maintenance, if you need to fix a few bricks on your chimney, but you're not rebuilding the whole chimney, that's going to be an operating or maintenance expense, and you can't use capital for it. If you're just repainting the interior of a room, that's not actually changing the useful life of anything. That's a maintenance expense. Pieces of equipment, like I said before, that don't comprise an entire system, or those that you can move around and transport, those are not capital. Anything with a useful life of less than 10 years does not qualify. Anything that's not extending the useful life or increasing the value of the property. And anything that is programming or staffing related, that's also an operating expense. So even, like I said before, if it's staff that is going to be associated with the capital project, maybe your executive director is managing the project in-house, that is not a capital expense. That's still coming out of your operating funds. If you're installing a new exhibition in your gallery space, you can pay for the elements that are outfitting the gallery to prepare it for the exhibition, but you can't pay for the elements that are the exhibit itself. Those are some distinctions of what you can and cannot include in your capital budget. If you still have questions or concerns, you're not sure, just email us or come to office hours and we will talk it through. All right, Lindsay, let me toss it back over to you. Let's talk about if your project is ready to submit an application to NISCA.
So if you are still with us and you feel like you meet the requirements of capital eligibility, the next thing to think about is your specific project and whether it is application ready. We mentioned earlier that the grant term begins July 1st, 2024. Projects need to be ready to commence within the first 12 months. So is your project shovel ready? Can you get to work right away? Proposals also need to be sufficiently developed so that they are ready to substantiate detailed estimates from the contractors and vendors that could be engaged to do the work. So in support of that, we're talking about your construction drawings, for example. We need to be able to see a set of design documents that are sufficiently detailed for bidding, permitting, and construction. They must be prepared by a New York State licensed architect or engineer, and they will serve as the basis for the contractor estimates that are submitted with the application. We know that not all projects are going to require the same level of detail. So you may also have something such as roofing, HVAC, boilers, wheelchair lifts, where what we really need is a detailed scope of work. It might not require an architect or engineer, but again, we need to be able to review these in panel. Katie will talk a little bit later about how projects are evaluated and how we make our decisions. But a number of experts will be looking at everything submitted with your application. And these documents need to be able to tell the complete story of what you plan to do. Equipment requests should be prepared in order to supply price lists and specifications for the system that you expect to purchase. And then again, if you are considering large capital, we just want to reiterate again, please reach out to capital projects to set up a time to discuss this before you submit your application. We just want to make sure that your project aligns with program priorities for this year. On to the next slide. Speaking of funding priorities, so these are discussed in detail in the guidelines, and I recommend that everybody go through and review them. The first ones are consistent for both small, mid-size, and large opportunities. We're going to look at accessibility, artistry, cultural development, diversity, environmental sustainability, health and safety, organizational health, and structural and historical improvements. Again, if you have any questions about these, we can answer some of that in the FAQs. They're also discussed in detail in the guidelines. There is one additional requirement for large requirements or large projects. We can go to the next slide, and that is community development. And this is really what comes into play when we want to discuss large projects and whether they're a good fit for this program. We're looking at things that contribute to local workforce development and/or the expansion of tourism growth and placemaking and downtown revitalization. So this is really key for large projects. That being said, your project does not need to hit all 7 of those. You will have an opportunity in the application to check which ones apply to your project. And then later there is a narrative section where you can describe how. We are looking for you to speak about the ones that are most significant. Even if you checked every single priority, focus on those that are most relevant to your project. And if, for example, there's one of these that you are not hitting, but most people would think you probably should. For example, let's say you are doing an entire renovation of your building, and for some reason you are not putting in new double paned windows. We need you to explain why you aren't doing that, because that would be a potential way to increase the environmental sustainability and improve your energy use. But perhaps they're historic windows that you need to retain. So again, this is the narrative section is an opportunity for you to discuss any priorities that one might think your project should logically hit, but for some reason you are not going to be addressing in your particular capital project.
let me just add here that as you're deciding which opportunity you want to apply for, if you have a large project, that's over $4 million, that does not mean that you have to apply in the large category. You can have a large project and still apply in small and mid-size for a grant that's under $2 million. And and this is why we want you to come and talk with us first, if your project is not one that is going to, make a strong case for economic development and community development, the large capital projects fund is probably not the appropriate place for you to set that, but you can still apply in the small and mid-sized program. There's no cap, no maximum on the total project cost. So please keep that in mind. The economic development priority here, it should be like a quarter of the screen, because it's 25% of the overall score, which we'll talk about in a minute. That should be a major factor in your decision about whether this is the right program for you. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the scoring. But first, let's talk about financing and what happens after your project is complete. Applicants to either of these opportunities are going to need to demonstrate that they have the capacity to finance their projects through completion. And that's because the majority of the funding is awarded on a reimbursement basis. So you're going to have to show us that you can sort of float the project financially until those reimbursements from the grant would be able to come through. And those reimbursements are on a progress basis. So we'll talk about that too. Each of the matching grants, so anything over $50,000 is going to have to upload a fundraising, financing, and cash management plan, which is basically showing us what are the sources of support that you're planning to fundraise from, or if you have them in hand already, where you're getting your financing from, whether it's a board member or a loan from the bank or whatever it is, and then a plan for your cash flow throughout the duration of the project. We also are going to ask you to talk to us about your plans for maintaining the improvements or the equipment that you're purchasing, and how you're planning to manage your operations after the improvement is complete. For some of you, maintaining your operations isn't going to change very much, because maybe you're just replacing a lighting system when you already had one, not a huge change. But for some of you, you're constructing a new wing on a building, you're adding 70 new jobs, you are, adding all of this high-tech equipment that requires a lot of regular and costly maintenance. We want to understand that you've thought that through, what your plans are, how you're going to adjust your revenue, and your fundraising and all of that. So please be prepared to talk about that at length. Don't leave those questions unanswered. Here is the payment schedule for the grants if you are to get an award. The $10,000 and $25,000 no match grants are paid upfront after contracts are executed. So that's all one lump sum payment right at the very beginning. The $50,000 no match grants and all of the matching grants are paid in 3 installments. The first 25% is paid after the execution of the contract. The grant period begins July 1st, 2024. That doesn't necessarily mean that's when your contract will be executed. Again, for your planning, make sure you're able to finance the project, regardless of when the NISCA funding will come through. We do try to pay very promptly. However, there are various steps to getting your contract executed, and it depends on when we get materials and if they need revisions, and if we have anything that we need to work through in compliance. So be prepared to finance even that first 25% if it goes later than July 1. The next 35% is paid after we receive an interim report that demonstrates 60% total project completion, not just 60% completion on the grant portion, but the overall project. So if you're asking for a $1 million grant, but it's a $30 million project, you have to show that 60% of the $30 million is complete. And that means those expenses have been paid. The final 40% of the grant will be paid after a final report that demonstrates 95% total project completion. And that includes showing receipts for 95% of the overall expenses, as well as photos of the work in place, among other things. So that's the payment schedule. It is not a time-based one, but a progress-based schedule. Next slide. All of the grants of $100,000 or more are also expected to comply with the state's minority and women business enterprise goals. So projects are going to have a 30% MWBE goal attached to them. There is not a we have not set a determination of whether it should be 15% and 15% MBE versus WBE. You can choose. There's no set balance there. But you must use a certified firm. It's not adequate for it to just be a firm that happens to be owned by a woman. It has to be a firm that is actually in the state directory and has been fully certified. You can search for MWBE firms on the website that is on the screen, ny.newnycontracts.com. If you scroll down on that website, you can find the directory of certified firms, and there are keywords that you can use to find the appropriate codes. If you have questions about this, there are more instructions within the guidelines, and you can also always attend in office hours, and I will happily walk you through it. I'll share my screen, and we will get you there. Next slide, please. If you're not able to achieve the 30% goal, there are some reasons that a waiver would be considered, but you should talk about what your reasons would be if you already know them in your application. There is a question where you are prompted to do this. Some reasons that would be accepted are that there were no firms that were certified that were available in your area. We ask that you do a statewide search because there might be regional offices nearby, but in general, if there are no firms anywhere nearby and no one will come to you from across the state, that's a reason. It's also possible that nobody opts to bid who is certified, or that their bids are not competitive, they're significantly higher, or that there aren't any certified firms with the appropriate expertise to do the work. So maybe they say, yeah, we'll come do it, but you discover that actually it's this very specialized thing and they don't have the proper training, or whatever it is. So there are reasons, but we like this contractor and we've used them before is not a reason that will be accepted, and there are a number of other reasons why people have preferences for who they want to use. But if you're agreeing to take a state grant, you're agreeing to a 30% MWBE goal. So please keep that in mind as you move through your projects and make your decisions about your contractors. Next slide, please. Okay,
all right.
I'm going to toss it back to you.
So we are not going to go step by step through the application itself, but there's some key things that you should keep in mind before you get started. You are going to be asked, once you log into Smart Simple, again, this is a separate portal from Grants Gateway where you get pre-qualified. Smart Simple is where you submit your actual application. So you will be asked off the bat to indicate the funding category you are in and also what type of funding. On the next screen, we'll sort of show you what that looks like. The application will include narrative responses, attachment uploads, and budgets, but the required questions, the budgets, and the uploads, and the order they are asked in will vary by grant amount and type. We want to reiterate that all application details, including the narrative questions and the downloadable budget forms, are available in the guidelines in the Smart Simple portal. But what you are going to be asked to complete and upload, again, will vary based on your funding amount and your funding type. So if we can click through to the next slide, please. So you'll see there on the left, it is asking for your funding levels. So the first two, the $10,000, $25,000, or $50,000 no match grant, and the $50,000 and $1 to $2 million grant categories, those both fall under small and mid-size, but they have different questions associated with them. And then the $2 million to $10 million grant is your large capital improvement category. Once you select those, you will need to select the funding category. So that's either going to be capital construction only, capital equipment only, or hybrid. So a combination of both equipment and construction. If you are applying for a large capital grant, you do not have to select your funding category. The application is the same regardless of whether it's construction, equipment, or hybrid, because usually it is going to end up being a bit of all of those. Once you have made your selections, select Save Draft at the bottom of the screen. And at that point, the order of your questions and the uploads will have locked into place. So we recommend at that point, for instance, if you are someone who prepares your application in a separate Word document, perhaps you like to create a narrative arc throughout it, please make sure that you have looked at the order the questions fall in Smart Simple once you save draft, so that the application draft that you're working on will match up when you go to actually submit your responses in Smart Simple. Next slide. There are a number of uploads. There are budgets. We'll ask for quotes, construction drawings, equipment lists. Please make sure to label these clearly and descriptively. They will be asked for in a specific order, as we mentioned, which is determined by the funding categories that are selected. So please do your best to upload them in order in the section they're requested. If for some reason things are not working out, contact us. We ask that you avoid extremely large files and documents with too many pages unless it's necessary. An example would be, obviously, your construction drawings may be very lengthy, very detailed, very large file. Again, if you're having any trouble there, please contact us. And if there's something that you feel is truly essential to your application that is not requested here, contact program staff so that we can discuss the best way forward for you. We may have an idea of where that fits in, or we may determine that it is something that you do need to permission to upload separately.
Let's talk about the budget. Everybody is required to submit a project budget. Depending on your grant size, you may be able to submit a short form budget, or you may have to submit the long form budget, but I promise it's actually not as long as it looks. So these budgets are for you to detail your anticipated grant expenditures, and then the use and source of fundraising for the remainder of the project. That says financing, but you're really showing us fundraising. And then your breakdown of hard versus soft costs. And you'll note in the guidelines, we ask that you, when you break them down, you may not use more than 15% of your grant funds on soft costs. Those are things like your architect fees, some construction management fees, furniture, fixtures, equipment, when that's allowed. There's more information on that in the guidelines. I suggest that you use Chrome as your default browser when you download these forms, and they are available in both the guidelines and in the application. If you download it from the application after you set which category you are going to apply to, it will give you the appropriate budget. So you don't even have to figure out, is this the right one for me? It will just tell you automatically. But essentially, if you're applying for a no match grant, $10,000, $25,000, or $50,000, you're going to use the short form budget. And if you're applying for any matching grant, $50,001 or up, you'll use the long form budget. So let's take a look first at the short form budget. Like I said earlier in the presentation, we are going to record a separate webinar that runs through these budgets. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time here. I'm going to run through it quickly. And then if you want more detail, please visit the NISCA website to have a look at that presentation as well. But essentially, you're filling in 4 quadrants here. The quadrants that are in column B, where it says NISCA request, you should only include lines that add up to the amount of your grant. So in column B, line 5, you're going to put the amount that you are requesting from NISCA. So let's say this is a $25,000 request, you're going to put that there. In the quadrant below, where there's the purple arrow, you're going to break down that $25,000 however it is that you're planning to spend it. In this case, we've got $5,000 of the grant going to construction or, and the labor of the installation. And then we have $20,000 on line 12 going to the purchase of an equipment system. When we move over to column C, this is where you're going to list the total project expenses, including your NISCA request. So it's all inclusive. So we should be able to see what the total project costs. Since this is a no match grant, it may well be that all you have here is also $25,000. It's just the grant funds are 100% of the project. That's fine. It should be at least $25,000 though. If it's less than, this is not an eligible request because we can't fund something that has less expenses than what the grant is for. Okay. In this case, that's on the screen right now, this is a $35,000 project. So they have expenses that are $10,000 more than what they're asking for from NISCA. That's fine. That means they're getting $10,000 from somewhere else. You can see that that's in the box that's green right next to the blue arrow on line 4 in column C. That's where they have any other income that they're using. The $25,000 from NISCA is listed again in line 5. Oh, back it up for 1 second. And then down below, we have all, in the quadrant with the green arrow, we have all the expenses for the whole project, including what NISCA would be funding. So still $5,000 in construction or labor, and then $30,000 in capital equipment. So the purchase of that system. You put your totals in, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward. And we'll take you through it. I'll actually demonstrate how to fill it out on the webinar separately. Okay, so let's talk long form budget. Again, I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. If you've used this form before, you will find that this is simplified from last year. We're no longer asking you to fill in the budget summary tab for the purpose of the application. That would only be used for contracting and reporting if you were to get a grant. So this got a little bit easier from last year. If this is the first time you're doing this, ignore everything I just said. Don't worry about it. When you open this document, it's an Excel workbook that has 3 tabs in it. You should start by clicking the first tab on the left that is circled in blue on the screen. This is the instructions. If you walk through this line by line, it will tell you exactly what you need to do. So once you have read the instructions carefully and maybe watched the separate budget webinar, you can move over to the second tab. That's the itemized budget. Go to the next slide. Other way. There we go. This is what the itemized budget tab looks like. And the arrows show you these are the only things that you should be touching on this screen. You don't need to fill anything else out. The blue arrows on top, please fill in your organization name at the first arrow. You're the applicant / grantee. The project name at the second blue arrow. This should be a simple name and it should match what you're writing in your application. So if you're renovating a theater renovation would be good. If you're buying a lighting system would be good. The green arrows, if appropriate, you should adjust those lines, rename them depending on what it is you're doing. So let's say you're replacing your roof. That would be a general construction cost, and you should change where it says general construction contract 1 and write roofing. If you expect you'll have more than one contract, so like more than one trade under general construction, you can fill in as many of those as you need to and add expenses in the appropriate lines. Same thing for capitally eligible systems down below where the green arrow is. If you're just buying one system, let's say it's a lighting system, then you should rename system 1, and it should just say lighting system or lighting system purchase. If you're buying lighting and sound, please separate those systems. We need to be able to verify the eligibility of each separate individual system. Okay, so you can add lines in here too if you absolutely need to. Some of you have very long, complicated budgets. That's fine. Insert lines. Please just make sure that the formulas are carrying through the document. If you have trouble with this, you can always email us. Finally, the orange arrows. These are the only columns you should be filling in on this page. Please ignore everything from column G on to the right. Funding source, please tell us where you're getting the money that's not coming from NISCA for each line item. So maybe one of them is coming from foundations, some of them are coming from individuals, something from the city. Just that's as specific as that needs to be. Column D for each line item, tell us if that money is already in hand. You can write secured. If it's in progress, you've got an application in and you're waiting to hear, or if it's anticipated. And if it's multiple sources, you can just use commas between them in the same order. So if you said foundation, individuals, city, then you could write secured, in progress on that line. Columns E and F. Column E is your total project budget. So NISCA funds plus matching funds and how you're breaking them down. Just put everything in there, and the totals at the bottom of the page should add up to your total project cost as you've listed it elsewhere in your application. Column F is just the NISCA funds. So if you're asking for $500,000 and your total project cost is $1 million, the expenses in column E should add up to $1 million, and the expenses in column F should add up to $500,000. Okay, next slide. Just showing you, don't touch those other columns. You don't need to do it. This is it. You're done. You've finished your budget. Again, I will walk through how to do all of this. I will demonstrate it, filling it in the capital budget webinar. All right, how is my application evaluated? So Lindsay mentioned before, there are panelists. NISCA always uses a panel process to evaluate capital projects applications. Every panel has an architect, at least one engineer. Those with equipment purchases will have technical production folks who have expertise in all of that equipment. We have arts administrators who have experience leading capital projects. We have CFOs and finance people. We try to bring together a really diverse set of expertise so that we can evaluate every element of your application appropriately. Panelists will consider the design elements, the technical elements of the proposal, the value to the community, and then the overall project feasibility, which includes your capacity to finance and fundraise and maintain the facility after completion. For large capital projects, of course, we're also considering the economic and community development components. Next slide. Every panelist will evaluate and numerically rate each request against the criteria, which are posted in the opportunity guidelines. Those ratings are aggregated to a single average score for each request. So that's how you get your overall score. The ratings then inform the funding recommendations made by NISCA staff. And it's important to know that the ranges for the grants that are listed in the guidelines mean that, of course, you can apply for any amount that you are eligible for based on your total project cost. But the actual recommendations may change. So you might, if you are awarded a grant, you might receive an amount that is lower than what you requested. And this is based on a number of factors, including whether you have ineligible expenses in your budget. So we might need to remove some parts of it. But most likely it's dependent upon the amount of eligible or high scoring requests that we have as compared to the amount of money that we have in the pool in a given year. For large capital requests, part of that scoring process will include Empire State Development conducting a benefit cost analysis. The results of that benefit cost analysis will be incorporated into the scoring process. They'll be converted into a score that will make up 25% of the overall score. So you'll just have a fourth category to be averaged across. And just a note, if you know somebody who you think would make a great panelist, we are accepting nominations for capital right now. You can see the website on the screen, arts.ny.gov/panelists. This is a look at the scored criteria. You will find this exact table in the guidelines. Next slide. And this is the scoring guide. And please note that the way that the scoring works, we will score from 0 to 5 in each category, and any application that receives an average score in any individual category of 2 or below will not be eligible for support. So you could have 5s across the board in 2 of the 3 categories for small and mid-sized grants, but if you get a 2 in another category as an average score, you're not going to be eligible for support this year. Lindsay, who should I contact if I have questions?
Us.
Oh.
As mentioned, there will be a PDF of this PowerPoint available on the website, so you'll have access to all of this contact information. But we want to encourage everyone to ask questions. We are here to help, and you should never fear that any question you ask is going to have bearing on your application. We're here to support you. So please contact Capital Project staff at capitalproject@arts.ny.gov with specific questions about your application. Again, we'll be hosting multiple office hours between Friday all the way up until the beginning of January. It's always great to tune into those, even if you don't have a specific question, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and hearing from your peers is a great way to think about aspects of your project that you might not have considered. We do ask for you to do your very best to contact us with any specific questions by January 5th of 2024, because we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to get back to each of you. We know people may be coming back from time off, and there will be lots and lots of questions. For any technical inquiries about pre-qualification or submitting applications via Smart Simple, please contact help@arts.ny.gov. And then again, just one more time, please jump in and pre-qualify or check your pre-qualification status in Grants Gateway as soon as possible, but it must be done by the application deadline. And again, these are two separate portals.
Okay, we're going to just jump into we've popped some frequently asked questions into the slides here. Some of these incorporate some of your questions that you asked already in advance. And then we will jump into what's populating the Q&A. So very quickly, I will run through, we'll try to get to as many as we can. I want to apply for a $100,000 grant. What is my minimum total project size? Your minimum would be $200,000 because your grant can't make up more than half of the total project. I want to apply for a $10,000 grant. What's my minimum total project size? For a grant of $10,000, that's a no match grant. So your minimum total project would just be $10,000. Can't be less, but your grant could be 100% of the total project. Is there a minimum operating budget size? So no minimum operating budget size for any of the programs. You could have a very small budget and still be eligible to apply as long as you meet all the other criteria. There is a maximum of $2 million operating budget for no match grants. You can't apply for those if you have a budget over $2 million, an organizational budget over $2 million. But there are no operating budget restrictions on any of the matching grants. You can apply no matter what size you are. Can I apply for renovations to my organization's office space? No, office space is not eligible because it's not open to the public, and we are focused on the arts and cultural elements of the organization. That being said, can I apply for renovations to my theater's freight elevator, even though it's not open to the public? Yes, it is part of the overall sort of performance or exhibition space. It's how you get those elements into the space. So we would consider that to be part of the arts and cultural portion of the space. Next slide. What are soft costs and how much of the grant can support them? I mentioned before, soft costs include the elements of a construction budget that are not the direct costs of constructing the building. So it's not the labor to build the walls, but it is sort of necessary to the project. So architecture and design fees, construction, project management. There are furniture, fixtures, and equipment is a common one in certain budgets. It's not eligible all the time. If you want to include that, please check with us. And they can make up 15% of your grant request amount, not more. Contingency is not a soft cost, but we include that in that 15% maximum. So if you want to add contingency in, you can't have 15% of your budget going to soft costs and then also have 10% contingency. That's a combined 15% maximum. Can I use NISCA funds to pay for new furniture for my lobby? So on that furniture, fixtures, and equipment, the only time that's an eligible expense is when it's a change of use of a space or initial outfitting for a brand new space. So if you're building a new building, you can use up to 15% of your grant on furniture, fixtures, and equipment to outfit the space the first time. If you are changing your space over, like it used to be a theater and now you're turning it into a lobby, that also constitutes a change of use. And so you could use funds for initial outfitting costs for that as well, including furniture. There are no other circumstances when you can include furniture in your construction budget. And then can I use funds to pay for my architect? Again, yes, that's a soft cost, up to 15% for all soft costs, including architect and design fees.
I'm just going to jump in right there too and stress that that has to be fees that you accrue with your architect after the grant origination date. So even though you've already had to contract with an architect to prepare your construction drawings for the application, any grant funds cannot be applicable until after the grant is awarded. So it would have to be the work your architect continues to do with you after that point.
That's correct. And just a reminder here, we are expecting pretty advanced level drawings if you are working with an architect for our review. This is a late stage opportunity. We're not at a conceptual phase. So you can't really use your grant funds here to pay for like the initial design that your architect is doing. That should be done by now. But if you do continue to have costs, then yes, you could use your grant funds up to 15% of them for those. Can I start my project before the grant period start date, Lindsay?
You can, but no NISCA funds can be expended.
Do I need to have matching funds in hand at the time of the application?
No, you don't. That's exactly what the column in the budget is for, where you talk about whether the funds are in hand or in process or not yet acquired.
That's right. And please keep in mind that that's a place where, you don't necessarily have to have them secured, but you should be able to tell us where you're planning to get them. And the more confident that the panel can be in your ability to fundraise, the stronger your scores are going to be in that panel review. Can a university apply for renovations to its performance venue or museum? I covered this earlier in the presentation. If you have an independent organization that operates under the umbrella of the university, you should contact us for approval to apply. Same deal with health and human service organizations. You have to have an autonomous arts organization that's dedicated to that purpose, operating under your umbrella. Can zoos, botanical gardens, or public libraries apply, Lindsay?
The same applies here. They have to be an autonomous organization, exactly as we were talking about, like a performance venue or a museum under a university. We admire the work you do, but it's this opportunity is strictly for the arts.
Can multiple organizations apply jointly? The answer to this is a little tricky. Yes, you can, but you have to designate one of the partners as the lead applicant. And that organization needs to have site control of the space that's going to be improved. So if there's a lease or a deed, it needs to be in the name of the applicant organization. But you can always include sort of a partnership or an MOU letter or an MOU or something like that in your uploads to demonstrate the partnership between the organization. Next slide. Okay, can I apply if I have a 1-year lease? No, we don't have any opportunities for that. 2 years is the minimum for $10,000 and $25,000 equipment only grants. Everybody else, it depends on your IRS useful life estimate, but it couldn't possibly be less than 10 years. But it varies by project. I'm in the process of closing on a building, but I won't be closed by January 11th. Unfortunately, you don't have adequate site control at the time of the application deadline, so you would not be eligible to apply. I don't have a long-term lease, but I am buying equipment that can move easily to a different space. Based on what we have talked about already about what constitutes a capitally eligible equipment system, the answer to this is no, it needs to be permanently installed. And I want to use funds to acquire a parcel of land adjacent to the building I own. So listen, property acquisition is a capital expense. It's just not eligible in this program. So that would not be an expense that we would be able to, you would be able to apply for. Next slide. Lindsay, I have a $1 million organization with a $4 million project. Can I apply to large capital?
Yes.
What if I have a $10 million organization with a $50,000 project? Can I apply for a $50,000 no match grant?
No.
No. There's a $2 million organizational budget maximum for no match grant. Can I use federal funds or city funds to meet the match?
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Those are not state funds, so you can absolutely use them to meet the match. You just can't use, can I use state funds to meet the match?
No, you cannot. They are part of the match.
The combination of all state funds that you have in your budget can't exceed 50% of the total project cost.
Yeah.
Next slide. I have a previous NISCA capital grant for a project that is not yet complete. Can I still apply this year? Yes, you can. You may not be prioritized if there's another applicant that has never received funding before, and you are going to be asked to address the status of that project. Some of them are not scheduled to be finished yet, and that's fine. Some of them are, and maybe it's delayed, and you should explain that. The panel is going to be very interested in whether the organization really has the capacity to take on a new project this time. I applied last year, but I didn't receive funding. Can I apply for the same project?
You can. We strongly encourage you to contact Capital Projects to discuss last year's application if you have not already. Even if you already have and you want to talk to us again, we are here for you to support that.
Please get your feedback. The only way to know why you didn't get it last year is to call and ask. So we are here. We're trying to help you improve the application for next time. I applied for support for organizations earlier this year through NISCA. Am I eligible for a capital grant as well? Definitely yes. Please apply. There's no restriction based on other things you've applied for at NISCA. You can apply to capital if you've never applied before for anything. You can apply if you got a support for organizations grant. You can apply if you applied for support for organizations in the past and you didn't get it. There's no restriction around that. All right, we're going to jump to the Q&A now, the live Q&A, and take some questions there. Just a moment.
All right, here's a good question. If there are two scope components of our proposal, does the panel ever consider funding the priority of only one of the two, or is it all or nothing? Katie touched upon this briefly, that there are situations where NISCA may not fund the entire project for various reasons, but if it is a good project, we are not going to take the all or nothing approach. If there's just some elements that aren't fundable, that will be reflected in the award, but you should put forth your proposal as the project dictates, and we will consider all of it.
There was also a question of, what's the average acceptance rate for applications to capital grants? I get this question all the time, every year, and the only answer I can give you is it depends. Depends how many applications we have and how much money we have in a given year, and whether those applications, are ready for funding. So I'm afraid I can't really answer that. Do we need to be a 501c3? Yes. And specifically a 501c3 with a primary mission for arts and culture. How can our organization verify that our project is considered capital work as opposed to maintenance? Just ask us. Come to office hours. Send us an email. Send us your scope of work. We will review it. And then if we have funding from a NISCA statewide community re-grant site, can we apply? This is a great question. Yes, this is sort of the only time if you're an SCR re-grant recipient that you can also apply directly to NISCA, because we don't have re-grants for capital. But you can't do it. I just want to clarify for some folks, you can't do this as a fiscal sponsorship. We do not allow fiscal sponsorship. The applicant has to be the organization that has site control of the property.
Here's a great question that goes back to talking about the funding priorities and what we mentioned about explaining why or why not you might be doing something. Our scope currently replaces gas heating. Would it score stronger with an electric split unit system? So this is your opportunity to tell us why you may not be using an electric split unit system. The final scoring is also, up to our panelists, so we can't reflect on this at that point. But again, this is your opportunity to say why we're sticking with our gas and not going with electric split.
I'm interested in learning more about the process of contracting and design that needs to be completed prior to initiating an application. Okay, so here's, I think this is a super important question. We get a lot of this. So there's two things. One is how far along your drawings need to be, if you need to have drawings, or how far along your scope of work is. if you don't need to have drawings. And then the second is about price estimates from contractors, right? You're required to have 2 estimates from contractors. You could also submit an estimate from a third-party estimator. We'd prefer if you did that rather than having your architect draw up estimates. Here's how those things work together. If you don't yet have advanced drawings, it's very difficult for you to get concrete pricing from contractors who are there to give you estimates. And so what we end up with in panel is some very, conceptual level drawings or maybe renderings that we're looking at. So we have an idea of what you want to do, but not a real clear-cut sense of what it's going to take yet. And then we have some very vague estimates from contractors that are very likely to change drastically once you get that advanced design set. So it's very early days for us to be able to sort of put a stamp of approval on this and say, yeah, technically speaking, this is really sound and we feel really confident in this budget. And that's why we ask for the things the way we ask for them. So if you don't think you're at a stage yet where your drawings are ready for you to go get detailed price estimates from contractors, then you're probably not ready to submit. But if you have questions, you're always welcome to come and talk to us about them. Okay.
If a current capital project grant is either underway or delayed, is the organization eligible for a new capital grant that is for a different project? So you, you have to keep in mind the funding limitations, which we mentioned about prior capital funding. But there is a question in the application that specifically asks whether you have gotten recent NISCA capital funding. So if your project is either underway or delayed, this is the opportunity to talk about it. This may, if the project is delayed, that may reflect on your final score, but there may be a reason that does not reflect on your final score. This is, again, the area where you can explain to us what is going on with your current project.
So I'm sifting through these questions. There's a lot that I think we've just covered. Somebody asks, we are a small organization in a rural community. Please address information that would be helpful in the evaluation of an organization such as ours. There are questions where you're asked to address sort of the impact of the improvements. There's also a background question where you're encouraged to talk about your community. These are places where you should discuss, the sort of why and who for and why now. To explain the benefits of your community. We try to get panelists from across the state, people that are really familiar with all different communities, all different regions. But of course, there's a limit to how many people can be on a panel. So don't presume that everybody knows everything about your area. Explain it to us. Take that background section as an opportunity to tell us what the needs are and why you're filling that niche. But please know that we are evaluating these applications like on a case-by-case basis, right? You're not being, if you're a rural organization, historical society, you're not being compared to a giant museum in Manhattan, right? Like you're being evaluated within the context of what it is that you're trying to do in your region. So, but give us as much information as you can about what your needs are and what the particular things are that your community is special about your community. Okay, we have hit 12:15. Somebody asks, when is the earliest date that the capital project can begin? And I just will reiterate, it can begin now, but you can't expend any NISCA funds prior to July 1, 2024. So if you have a project that's already in progress or it will start before then please be sure to be very clear in your timeline about when NISCA funds would be expended. And then someone asked, how do we show proof of useful life that's greater than 10 years? Is there an IRS page that estimates the useful life stats for equipment? There is not actually that I know of. But if you are working with a contractor, then they should be able to tell you that information. If you're purchasing equipment, the manufacturer should be able to tell you that information. And if you're still not sure, there are tables of these useful life estimates do exist somewhere, and I would be happy to try to help you locate the estimate for your specific project. Just send me an email.
There's a request about where to find the long form budget all budgets, all forms that you need for the application are available both in the guidelines as downloads and through Smart Simple as guidelines.
Someone asked about phasing projects, which is to say they have a project that's going to happen. Phase 1 is $2 million. Phase 2 is $2 million. And, is it possible to just apply for one of those phases, or should they apply for both? You are absolutely welcome to carve out a portion of your project and make it its own discrete capital project. In some cases, that could be beneficial. You would have to apply for less money because you could only apply for up to 15% of the overall 50% of the overall project cost. However, in some cases, this might be beneficial because you don't have to wait until you hit 95% total project completion before you can request the last 40% of your NISCA funding. So there are definitely reasons to phase your project and reduce your overall scope of work for the purposes of this. But I would suggest if you do that, be sure to talk about how this phase fits in with the larger project and what the timeline is for the larger project in your application, just so the panel is aware of what your overall plans are. Okay, so, and then someone says the application manual says organizations can only apply for one grant and only for one capital opportunity. Does that mean if we apply for capital, we cannot apply to something like museums or other NISCA programs later this year? No, this is only referring to the capital projects. It means that you can't apply for a no match grant and a matching grant in capital. You can't apply for a small and mid-sized grant and a large capital grant. You have to pick one. But your capital application, your one capital application this year, has no bearing on your ability to apply for other things at NISCA outside of capital. We're in a government-owned building. I wouldn't say we have a long-term lease, but we have a management agreement with the city. Would we qualify, especially if we could get a letter from the city? A letter is not going to qualify, but other kinds of licensing agreements may qualify, and you are welcome to send them to us in advance to review. If they are legally binding documents that give you exclusive use of the facility for a period of time that is at least as long as the useful life estimate on the project, then they may well qualify. Somebody asked for examples of an equipment system, lighting systems, sound systems, projection systems, auditorium seating systems. If you're replacing all of your auditorium seats, also count as systems. Gallery track lighting counts as a system if you have all of the elements of it. We are well over our time. So I think, I know we weren't able to get to everybody's questions because there's so many of you and they're great questions. So I would encourage you to send us an email to follow up. And even more than that, I would encourage you to attend office hours on Friday or any of the subsequent office hour sessions that are already scheduled from now until January. And we'll be happy to get into all of these. If your question wasn't answered, it may just be time or may have just been a little bit too specific for this forum, but all kinds of questions are welcome in office hours, and we really think it's a great opportunity for everyone. So please join us for that. Please check out the budget webinars that we're going to post later this week for guidance on how to complete the budgets. And thank you for coming. This concludes today's webinar. And a reminder that this session has also been recorded and will be posted on the website along with the presentation slide deck. A reminder, if you want to attend those office hours, you need to register ahead of time. There is a max capacity of 35 people per session. So please get on that if you want to attend, and please don't sign up if you don't think you're actually going to be able to attend. So don't take a slot away from somebody else. You can always reach out to Lindsay or me directly during regular work hours. You can send an email after work hours too. We'll get back to you the next day, hopefully. The best way to reach us is capitalprojects@arts.ny.gov. And if you have questions about pre-qualification or technical questions related to the application portal, please reach out to the help desk, help@arts.ny.gov. We are here to help you in any way we can. We really want everybody to be successful. Um, to all the attendees joining us today, we're so grateful for all of your remarkable work, for your creativity, for your innovation, and we look forward to receiving your capital applications by January 11th, 2024, no later than 4 p.m. Thank you all so much. I'm Katie Steger with my colleague Lindsay Turley. Have a wonderful day.